Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope your day is starting off as fantastic as it possibly can. And how can it start fantastically if we're constantly being bombarded by a barrage of inflammatory rhetoric in the media every day? All of that rhetoric coming from south of the border, from the United States, and many Canadians feeling scared and unsure of the future. So I'm going to spend a little time in this video talking about the nonsense and rhetoric that our media just echoes and perpetuates, and call them out on some of the BS reporting that they're doing, and then talk about some of the reality that's happening behind the scenes, and then talk about some of the things that Canada can do in response to what's happening from the attacks and threats that are directed to us from the United States. Right? So first, calling out the media. It seems like every day when the buffoon from down south opens his mouth, the leader of the United States, the man that the United States elected to represent them, who is imposing threats and demands directed to all countries in the world, but specifically towards Canada, it seems like every day there's a new threat in the form of tariffs, the constant moving tariff goalposts. And what happens is the bombastic buffoon says something on social media, and then the mainstream media, almost all the media in Canada, simply spread and parrot the words. For example, the United States will impose tariffs on Canada, stating that Canada is a national security threat to the United States because Canada allows the free flow of fentanyl into the United States. And until Canada fixes the border, the United States is going to impose these tariffs on us. And then the media just parrots this, and some politicians just parrot this. And you'll hear and read ridiculous nonsense like Canada should fix its border. All the United States wants is for Canada to fix the border, and then the tariffs will be dropped. We have our own politicians flying down to Mar-a-Lago to get their pictures taken with Donald Trump, and then coming back and saying, well, all Donald Trump wants us to do is fix our border. There will be stories posted on web pages of all the major news outlets in Canada, all parroting the same thing. The United States says that Canada's border is broken, and until we fix that border, we could face these tariffs. What are we going to do? Is so profoundly stupid, and I have to call out the media outlets that perpetuate this, because let me just be direct to you with no BS. Have you ever crossed the border between Canada and the United States, or the border between any two countries? If you're in Canada here and you load up some drugs in the back of your car in the trunk, and you try and smuggle those into the United States, when you get to the border, who is responsible for searching your car, checking your identification, seeing that you have a passport and a good reason to enter the country? Who's responsible for that? Would it be Canada that's responsible for that? No, of course not. The United States is responsible for controlling the border, what enters their country. It is so ridiculous for the media to parrot this nonsense and just perpetuate what a buffoon says and normalize it and spread it out into the media so that simple-minded people can become numbed to what's actually going on and start to believe this stuff. Now, if the United States was serious about a problem of drugs crossing the border, if there really was a problem and they were serious about that, there are a lot of things that our two nations could do together. We could share information between different law enforcement agencies. We could implement different policies and different ways that we can cooperate to try and share information and track down international drug movement. There's lots of things that we could actually do together if there was a problem. But the United States isn't interested in solving a problem. They're interested in throwing a ridiculous narrative into the media, and the media that calls themselves news just repeats this stuff like parrots, and we're supposed to believe that Canada needs to fix its border. What Canada needs to do is stop illegal things from the United States entering our country, like illegal guns. That's what Canada needs to do. So using nonsense excuses like this, and other nonsense excuses like the United States is subsidizing Canada. The United States subsidizes Canada for $50 billion a year, $100 billion a year, $150, $300 billion a year. Canada's not going to rip off the United States anymore. We're going to put tariffs on you. And then the media just parrots this. That's also nonsense, but it's another excuse used to justify the imposition of tariffs on imports of Canadian goods. Now, this video isn't about trying to explain why the United States is doing this. They just are. So what does Canada do about it? Canada. Remember Canada? That's the place we live and the place we need to look out after. And I'm flashing pictures behind me of different beautiful scenes from our country that you have all shared on the I Choose Canada group. So there's three reactions that have come up over and over again in the comment section of these videos and in the media and when you talk to politicians. Let me go through the three of them because I think they're all three bad ideas. And I'll explain why in a calm, rational way without using inflammatory rhetoric, okay? The first one that you read a lot is, let's just shut down all trade with the United States. We've had enough. Let's just move on and shut down all trade with the United States. Now that may feel good as a gut reaction. And if it was just a personal relationship you were having with someone else, that might be a good reaction. I've had enough of this guy. I'm not calling him anymore. I'm moving on. But the fact is that we have to separate our personal feelings, people to people feelings, because we're dealing with something bigger, country to country relationships. And it is simply a fact that the United States and Canada, the trade that happens between our two countries, represents the largest trading relationship in the world. And it represents a large portion of Canada's trade, upwards of 70-75%. And it represents the biggest portion of the United States trade to a single country, somewhere around 15 to 20%. It's a big deal for both countries. And despite all the rhetoric that you hear of tariffs on aluminum, tariffs on steel, tariffs on copper, 35% tariffs on, we don't really know yet, all the rhetoric that you hear spewed, most of that trade is governed by the USMCA and continues without tariffs. So turning our back on the whole thing is just not the right thing to do, and it's something that's not a practical thing that could even be done. Because what you hear in the media and through news outlets, I use news in quotations because it's not really news, they always characterize and talk about this issue as a Canada-US issue. But you have to remember that that's not really correct. The trade that happens between Canada and the US, we refer to it as Canada-US trade, but it's really company to company trade. There's real people in Canada that own a company that buy or sell things to real people in the United States that work for a company. And when they buy and sell things between each other, those products cross the border. Those products are governed by the laws set forth by the countries. But all the trade that happens between our countries is really people to people, company to company. People are just trying to figure out what to do as we swim in this sea of BS that's being spewed by the leader of the United States, complicating things. And no government can just turn that off. The tens and tens of millions of people and hundreds of thousands of companies that trade back and forth every day. It would simply be irresponsible for, say, the Canadian government to pass a law that says companies in Canada are no longer allowed to trade with the United States. That's simply not a good thing to do. The second reaction you hear a lot is, well, why don't we just hit back? Why don't we just put tariffs on them? If they put tariffs on us, we should hit back. And you hear this a lot from people that just knee-jerk reactions, like from Doug Ford, and people that are always ready for a fight. And let me talk about this one for a minute, because that is also complicated and sometimes a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? Well, for the same reason that it's a bad idea for the United States to put tariffs on Canadian imports, because when US companies import things from Canada, they will pay the tariffs. It's bad for the importing companies. If Canada retaliates by imposing tariffs on imports of US goods, then when Canadian companies import those goods, the Canadian government will collect a tariff, a tax on those things, which will make those things more expensive for Canadian consumers. So just hitting the United States back tariff for tariff may feel good to talk about, but in reality, it will be a burden faced by Canadians. And what our government has done so far is just hit back with targeted tariffs on certain US imports that we can easily source from somewhere else. If Canadian importers are still willing to import those items from the United States, they'll be subject to a tariff, and the Canadian government will take a tax on that. But there's alternatives. We've targeted those products to include products that Canadian importers can source from other countries to shift our trade. Now that's a better thing to do, because what the United States is doing is targeting the whole world and targeting all imports that enter their country. Everything that they import will cost more because the US government is going to suck a tax from all of those products. And it's going to be very, very difficult and very hard for US consumers because those costs will eventually get passed on to them. It's a stupid policy, and we have to resist the temptation to fight back with our own stupid policy. The third thing that's commented a lot and talked about even by politicians is, why doesn't Canada impose an export tax on energy? Now let's think about that for a minute. Export tax on our energy. Why don't we put an export tax on oil and gas and electricity that's going to the United States? That'll fix those Americans. Well, actually, it won't fix those Americans. That is more of an internal Canadian policy. Now, let me give you an example here. What would happen if Canada put an export tax on oil exports to the United States? For every barrel of oil that we export to the United States, the federal government puts a $10 export tax per barrel, just as a number to consider here randomly. Well, who would pay that tax? The exporters of the oil. Companies and producers, mainly in Alberta, would pay that export tax to the Canadian government. It wouldn't change the cost of the oil to the United States at all. The cost of the commodity, the price that the United States pays for that import, would still be governed by the laws of supply and demand. What would really be happening is the federal government of Canada would be taking a tax on that export, and it would have a negative effect on the exporters of that commodity in the province where that happens. And what would the federal government do with that money? Well, the theory is that the federal government would take that money and then use it to help other industries that are being affected by targeted tariffs. So it's really a wealth redistribution within our own country. It's not a weapon to be used to fight the United States. It's more a damage control within our own country. And it's not a particularly good way of doing damage control because you're going to damage another industry to help an industry that's already damaged. So we can all seek the lowest common denominator. We can damage ourselves equally. A better solution is what the government is already doing. With the targeted tariffs that we've implemented on US imports, we are raising a lot of money. The Canadian federal government is raising a lot of money from our reciprocal targeted tariffs. We will use those funds to help specific industries that are being affected the most within our own country, or people and workers that lose their jobs in those industries. So our government is on the right track. And I guess what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't panic to these knee-jerk reactions and solutions, because the solutions are complicated and we just have to be calm and do things quietly behind the scenes. Now let me show you some reality, what's actually happening behind the scenes. There is a rainbow at the end of all this. That's pretty good, eh? That's a nice picture that someone supplied. Now, it is true that the tariffs that the United States is imposing on Canadian imports is going to decrease demand for a lot of our products, and we're going to see a slowdown in certain industries, the aluminum, the steel, the copper industry. There will be bad news, and the media will sensationalize this. But it's more complicated than that. There's the macro numbers, and then there's the micro numbers. Let me show you some numbers that maybe you haven't seen or you haven't thought about, or you didn't realize how this is all related and how it all fits together. Reported in the Globe and Mail, Canadian unemployment rate unexpectedly drops to 6.9%. The May jobs report for Canada came out, and it was a fantastic result, completely unexpected. Canadian employers went on a hiring blitz to start the summer, and the jobless rate unexpectedly dropped in June despite challenges posed by the country's trade war with the United States. Statistics Canada Labour Force Survey for June showed that the economy added more than 83,000 jobs. The result came as a surprise to economists who were expecting no change in employment and a jobless rate to increase to 7.1%. This was the largest increase in employment in 6 months. Now, why is that? Why did that happen? I thought Canada was going to be crushed economically, especially in provinces who rely on the exports like steel and aluminum, like Quebec, their major export being aluminum. And now with massive tariffs on aluminum, the numbers for Quebec must look terrible, right? Well, wrong, actually. As reported in Global News, Quebec GDP rises by 0.5% in the first quarter of 2025. Quebec's GDP increased. Quebec's inflation-adjusted GDP grew by 0.5% in the first quarter of 2025 compared to the previous year. The province's Statistics Institute says the growth is mainly from increased investment in the business sector. And this is an effect that you won't read in the inflammatory rhetoric that fills the media, and even some economists have kind of not factored this in. And that is the difference between macro numbers and micro numbers. We're going to get some negative numbers in the future in certain sectors. So when you read a report about that product in Canada, you'll read something like exports of that product down 14% to the United States. And it's a terrible number. You will read negative numbers like that. It's inevitable. And it's not our fault. Those are macro numbers that affect a certain industry, and they'll affect the Canadian GDP. It'll probably drop. We may actually have a drop in GDP for a number of quarters, and we might go into recession. That might happen. But then there's something else, the micro numbers, the real people numbers, what real people are doing, what 40 million Canadians are doing and deciding every day, the way our habits are changing, the way we're buying our own products, the way we're vacationing in our own country, the way we're not exporting our dollars to the United States. That will manifest in our economy in a huge way that's not captured by these macro number projections. Let me give you an example. A Canadian family is going to take a holiday this year. They're going to go away for 5 days. They had budgeted $1,000. $100 a night for a hotel for 5 days and $100 a night for food and entertainment. Now, I know those numbers are probably not realistic, but just to keep it as a simple example, they're going to spend $1,000. And in the past, they might have crossed the border and gone into the United States and stayed somewhere in the United States and spent that money in the United States. So $1,000 of that Canadian family's money that they saved, they're going to bring to the United States and dump into their economy. And that money will be absorbed in their economy and circulate in their economy. Well, Canadians en masse are not doing that anymore. This year, that family decided to take a 5-day holiday within our own country. So they're going to spend $500 on a hotel here and $500 on food and entertainment here. They're going to spend their $1,000 in Canada. And so the owner of the hotel in Canada where they're staying has an extra customer. And the restaurant that they go to in Canada has an extra customer. And if millions and millions of Canadian families are doing that, then there's lots of extra customers for hotels in Canada and for restaurants and entertainment in Canada. And guess what? Those hotel owners are going to be really busy and they're going to have to hire people to work there. Those restaurants are going to be really, really busy. They're going to have to hire more people. All the tourist destinations and the places where people go to spend money, they're all going to be really busy and they're going to have to hire more people. That's a completely different effect on the economy, completely different than, say, something like increasing the exports of oil and gas by 100,000 barrels a day. Sure, that will increase Canada's GDP, but it may not put any more people to work. That would be a good macro number for the Canadian economy. We're going to increase our exports. Sure, that's a good thing, but regular Canadians and Canadian families reinvesting their money in our own country is a huge thing. It's an effect that's not thought of a lot and not given enough credit for what it does to the economy, because it's well known that when you congregate enough people in one area, when a city gets to a certain size, it tends to build its own momentum, its own vibrancy as people shop and eat and do entertainment in that system, in that city. It becomes kind of like a washing machine, moving the money around within that system. People exchanging money for goods and services, and the economy can bubble and become vibrant and grow on its own, as opposed to the United States tourism industry, which is basically collapsing as they berate and threaten and become hostile to all countries all over the world. Who would want to go there? Why would you want to use your money to support them? As our Prime Minister said, we can do much more for ourselves than any other country can take away. So just remember, we're going to be constantly barraged with these negative numbers. It's easy to just cherry pick a negative number here and a negative number there, and there will be negative numbers. Believe me, I'm not trying to say that everything is great and there won't be any problems. There will be economic hardship in our country through no fault of our own due to the aggression and threats from the United States to us, which we can't control. We can't control that, and we don't have to get sucked in with this negative rhetoric. We have to just respond calmly on our own by keeping our money here, letting our money work for our own economy, letting our government try and build new trade relationships and new supply chains with other countries, and then hoping that our businesses and our companies can step up to the plate and take advantage of that. Make the transitions themselves. The government's not going to hold anyone's hands. There's millions of different businesses run by tens of millions of ordinary Canadians that have to make the change themselves. We have to diversify. If demand for your exports drops south of the border, person-to-person relationships change, you have to find new customers. That's what Canada has to do. And we're going to read headlines and we're going to hear negative news about the macro numbers, usually involving our big industries. There will be some negative numbers. But from a people perspective, we have huge power. There's 40 million of us that can make simple, rational decisions that will help our own country. If you want to go buy a big pickup truck that's made in the United States and buy yourself an RV that's made in the United States and then cross the border and go camping and spend 2 weeks on holidays in the United States and spend your money there and talk to everyone about how Canada is broken, then go ahead. You're not really helping the country. But if you use your brain and you use your wallet to support ourselves, tens of millions of us, being smart in the way we make our choices. If you choose Canada, there is no one man or person that can change the momentum of such a huge, fantastic country. There'll be a few bumps along the way, but we'll be just fine. So go out then and enjoy what hopefully will be a fantastic rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed my video. Subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. Leave some comments in the comments section, or go check out the new I Choose Canada merch that's usually pinned to the bottom of the video here. And if you want to support my channel monetarily on a monthly basis, hit the join button or click the link that I put in my comment that I pinned to the top of the comment section. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll catch you all on the next one.